We're here today with Bruce Zagaris. Bruce is a partner of Berliner, Corcoran Rowe, and he is also editor of the International Enforcement Law Reporter. His background is focused on transnational crime, money laundering, corruption. He's represented 14 governments. First of all, I'd like to welcome Bruce to the program.
Thank you very much, Adriana. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed very much your the OU series. What's happened with transnational organized crime is they've seen the pandemic, and so that presents all kinds of new opportunities for transnational organized crime. They have especially taken advantage of the fact that a lot of, well, most companies are working remotely. So employees and professionals now have to work from their home. From a cybersecurity point of view, and you know that because that's one of your big areas, it's much more difficult working from home to have the same cybersecurity protection. And so transnational organized crime is able to penetrate more easily a lot of companies by going through some of the vulnerabilities that the employees have working from home. Criminals, including transnational organized criminals, are increasingly using digital products. The takedown by the Eurojust and Europol of EncroChat. EncroChat was the encrypted platform that using the dark web, which transnational organized criminals were using in Europe. And the French gendarmes first identified that in Lille, and then using Eurojust and Europol, they infiltrated, they surveilled the criminals that were using EncroChat, and they eventually took it down. Now, even though they took it down, there's going to be...
You're going to pop up something else that's going to pop up.
Exactly.
Can you tell me also a little bit more about the trade-based money laundering that you just mentioned?
Sure. So trade-based money laundering enables criminals to more easily transfer proceeds of crime. In order to do that on a big scale, you need some kind of a front, some kind of a business. And so, you know, common way, for instance, are all the new companies that are doing CBD. Some of those are people that are also traditional marijuana growers. And so some of them, while they do legitimate CBD, they also have a backdoor where they are doing, you know, large-scale distribution of marijuana, and it's not always legal. I mean, in some states, you have both medicinal and even recreational, but not in all states. But the point is that the fact that some of the CBD or even some of the marijuana may be legitimate.
And when you're talking about integrating, what a company and what an executive needs to look for, I guess, if you're working in that company, is you're going to see that there's some invoices that are written where there is no product. You're going to see, tell us a little bit more of what to look for if you happen to be in this space.
So some of the third parties, like banks that are dealing with these businesses, they look for things like under invoicing, over invoicing, or they also look for products that are coming through that they know aren't traditionally produced in the jurisdiction where they're coming from.
That's an interesting point. I guess another area where you see some, irregular activity can sometimes be around duty-free trade zones, right?
Exactly. So for instance, there's been a lot of trade-based money laundering going through some of the Panamanian free trade zones, especially because Panama is in between the cocaine producing countries and the consuming countries. And so the Colombian cartels have for decades invested a lot of proceeds of crime in Panama, some in buildings and some going through the free trade zone, using the black peso market exchange.
And the trade zone is convenient because it's cash, right? And there's
Yes.
less regulation, so that makes it easier to go ahead and make these transactions look legitimate. And
Yes.
also the duty-free trade zone, what I guess companies and executives should look at is if they are told that a product is going through the trade zone, make sure that it actually is, right?
Exactly. I mean, that was long used in Brazil to avoid VAT tax.
Right.
Going through the Amazon or the Northeast where you could reduce your VAT taxes. And so both Brazilian and foreign multinationals regularly invoiced through those jurisdictions, and yet they were shams. On July 15, both President Trump and Attorney General William Barr announced a number of prosecutions against MS-13. And for the first time, they charged an MS-13 as a terrorist. And so from the beginning of the Trump administration, MS-13 has been a priority. And the president issued an executive order in February of 2017 to take down MS-13. And there's been a joint task force to do so.
What about the tri-border region? How much of a concern is that for us in this country? I know it's a big concern, obviously, for Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay. And
right.
What about for us up here?
There has been a concern that some of the Middle East terrorist proceeds were going through the tri-border area. To the extent that transnational organized crime and terrorism is a concern to the U.S., the tri-border region is a problem. And therefore, about 4 years ago, the US and Brazil developed a robust enforcement task force. There's also a lot of narcotics that go through the tri-border area, and then a lot of it goes through West Africa, eventually to Europe. And so that's another, concern of US law enforcement, because these transnational organized crime groups continue to grow, and they branch out into other activities, not just drugs, but they get into arms trafficking, human trafficking. And so, yes, tri-border area is a concern to the US. Now, corporations, financial institutions, and gatekeepers, they have to do more in terms of vetting their clients, both onboarding and due diligence.
Many countries have adopted the Gatekeepers Initiative. The US has not. How does that play in, and what concerns should we see, or do we have because of that?
Well, the US is kind of on both sides of this. I mean, on the one hand, the US has been a leader in terms of sanctions, including human rights sanctions. It was the US that developed the Magnitsky Law, and then a couple of years ago, the global Magnitsky Law. On the other hand, in some cases, as you say, the US has not met international standards in terms of anti-money laundering. So that the US has been found non-compliant by the Financial Action Task Force, both in 2006 and 2016, when the Financial Action Task Force had the mutual evaluation of the United States. So the US was found non-compliant in both entity transparency, or also known as beneficial ownership, and the gatekeeper regulations. In order to have robust anti-money laundering regime, we have to include not only banks and financial institutions, but we have to include the gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are lawyers, accountants, auctioneers, jewelers, and other intermediaries. Like
That
real
happen to
estate.
be very close, that are actually the gatekeeper. I mean, the lawyer is the one that drafts the documents, and the accountant is the one that checks the numbers. So in essence,
Exactly.
they are the ones that are closest to the crime.
On July 10th, the UNODC, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, issued the World Wildlife Crime Report for this year, for 2020. And the report underscores the fact that wildlife trafficking has caused a lot of zoonotic diseases like COVID-19. So it seems that COVID-19 may have come from one of these live markets in Wuhan, where they sell pangolins and other wildlife. And so the UNODC report also points out the close connection between illegal wildlife trade and these zoonotic diseases. It also points out how increasingly transnational organized crime is involved in the illegal wildlife trade, and they are increasingly using digital products. It's going in that direction because using online platforms is fast. They can also use platforms that can conceal
Your identity.
either the trade or the flow of the money.
And they're borderless, yeah.
Especially if they can use the dark web. Because they only have to find a few countries where the enforcement is not good. And when those countries close the gaps, then the transnational organized crime, they move to another country. And so it's a cat and mouse game. Another problem has been, it's been hard for international enforcement to figure out the financing, the financial flows, because usually people that are arrested, they're often arrested at the point of the transaction. They're either arrested, the poachers are caught, or a number of times people are caught at the end.
Knowing the channels that they're using, and sometimes those channels are used for other criminal activity, right?
Exactly.
And this is actually what they're struggling with right now.